Good morning, good night, good everything in between. I can't remember anything else that I ever say on an intro.
She's your host, Cornelia Grace.
Oh, wow. And I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Charlotte.
And we're filming in person for once.
We're recording in person. I'm not filming this.
Well, can't you say film whether it's audio or video?
Yeah. No.
What?
No, you can't.
Fine. Film isn't as interchangeable as record.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, recording would be fine. Anyway, so we're recording this way after finishing reading this book, but we read Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. It was Charlotte's pick. She picked a single spell, and then I didn't feel like picking another book this year. So, well, this year being 2022. So Charlotte went ahead and picked another book.
And I had picked one that I wanted to read at spooky time.
Yeah, so we started it in
late October.
Yeah. But then we didn't finish it until early December.
Yeah.
And then December's really busy. So it is actually the last week of December now that we are recording. So I don't think this will be up anytime soon, but it'll be up eventually for all of our 0 listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it was Charlotte's pick, so she's going to read the little summary inside flap or whatever she's going to read for this book.
We're not doing an icebreaker?
Did you want to do an icebreaker?
I don't know.
I'm tired. So Charlotte came to hang out, and she brought her cat with her to my house, and her cat's been extremely stressed out.
Yeah, so she was here a couple months ago, and she was relatively fine. And this time, she just decided she hated it.
Yeah, she's not having a good time at all. But that's okay, she'll survive.
And now that she has finally decided to calm down today, I leave tomorrow.
Yes. It's a good time. Traveling with cats is not for the faint of heart, I guess.
Let us know if you have any tips. I would enjoy them. I want to get her harness trained as well, which will be a whole separate endeavor, and hopefully might allow her a little more freedom and get her a little more comfortable doing things that put her out of her comfort zone, but we shall see.
Anyway, that's the icebreaker. Let us know if you have cats.
Yeah, we love cats.
I have a cat. My mom has a cat. Both my sisters have cats. Charlotte has a cat. I can name everybody I know who has a cat. It's lots of cats. Cats are easy. They're free.
Yeah, you don't have to go pick out a special cat.
Every cat that we have was just plucked off the streets.
That's not to say they're not special. I should clarify this.
Yeah.
DJ is very special to me.
Yes. But we do just drag them off the street from the gutter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So. And then they complain the whole time.
Yeah. Even though then when you offer them the option to go back outside, they're just like, no. No, I'm staying right in your yard now.
Exactly.
This is where I live.
Yes. This is where the food is. All right, anyway. So we read this book. It has been a good little while since both of us finished this book. So I hope this discussion goes well. We have one copy between us.
We have one copy because I didn't bring mine, and you'll have to take us a little, loosey-goosey leeway with our facts and orders and such.
Yeah.
But we're hoping, if you're listening to this, you probably already have some ideas of who Abraham Lincoln is, for instance.
Yeah. Hopefully. I don't know. All right. Charlotte's going to read this stuff.
This is not an actual summary of the book, but I just thought it would be fun to read. So, the opening of the book is facts. Number 1. For over 250 years, between 1607 and 1865, vampires thrived in the shadows of America. Few humans believed in them. Number 2. Abraham Lincoln was one of the gifted vampire hunters of his day and kept a secret journal about his lifelong war against them. And 3. Rumors of this journal's existence have long been a favorite topic among historians and Lincoln biographers. Most dismiss it as myth.
Dun dun dun!
And then you enter the book with a framework that neither of us liked and that was never returned to again.
Yeah, this is going to be a spoiler-filled review of this book because I don't feel like holding back, and it's been so long since I finished it that I don't know if I could hold back on spoilers anyway.
That's not really a spoiler, though. It's just a...
No, it's the opening.
Yeah.
It's a spoiler that you just said that you don't come back to it, though. That's a spoiler.
Fine. Well, I wanted to spoil it because, honestly, I would be a little annoyed.
I was a little annoyed.
Corey kind of spoiled it for me and told me when I was, like, 3/4 of the way through.
Yeah, you were almost done with the book.
I was almost done with the book.
But... And you were looking for it to come up again.
Yes.
Just like I was looking for it to come up again. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want you to be looking for it because it's not going to come up. So it starts off, the book is framed. So a framing technique is when you start with like a person or a concept or an idea and then goes into the main story and then comes back. They circle back to this story, concept, or idea. It's a framing device. It frames the story. So it's usually at the beginning and at the end. I'm trying to think of a good example of a framed story. Oh, like, okay, Disney's Enchanted movie is framed because it starts two-dimensional and you see the fairy tale world and then you go into the main storyline, which takes place predominantly in the real world, and then it comes back to the animated world at the very end of the movie. So if you've seen that movie, that is a very simple framing device. That framing device does not necessarily have a lot to do with the plot, like just the fact that it is animated or not animated, but that is a framing device. So this book, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, uses a framing device where you meet a character named Seth Grahame-Smith, because he's a self-insert author character, and he is working at a store for the summer, and he ends up meeting a vampire who gives him the diaries from Abraham Lincoln, and then Seth Grahame-Smith puts everything together into the book.
Yes.
So it's very meta, and it's like, and it ruins his life because he gets
obsessed with like putting it together and like getting it out there.
Yeah, and so he loses his marriage and his family, and he's living alone in the basement of the shop, and like it's horrible for him. This is very short. It's not a long, particularly long introduction for this. It's 15 pages long.
And to be fair to it, I did enjoy that part, which is why I was kind of looking for it at the end. Yeah. And then was mildly annoyed when it never came up again, because I was like, well, now the book's out there. Like, what's the impact? Check back in with me, like.
Yeah, because we both were like, oh, this character, which is the author, but it's still a character in the story, obviously. You know, he's done all this work, and he's given up his entire life to put this story out there, and now I, as the reader, I'm reading it. So, how does that affect this character? And you just don't get to know.
No.
You don't return to it. It's a framing device that is missing the latter half of the frame. Mm-hmm. It's just a starting device instead, even though it should have been a framing device. So, yeah. So that's how it starts off.
It also has quotes at the beginning of several chapters, maybe just the ones at the start of a part, but I liked the quotes.
I hate quotes at the beginning of chapters. So.
I keep picking books that have quotes at the beginning of chapters. So.
Yeah, I hate them.
Not intentionally, but...
Every single time, I hate them. I actually am not a fan of the artwork in this book either. No. There's a bunch of pictures and stuff, and, like, they're obviously photoshopped to include, like, vampires and stuff.
Yeah. Or, like, imply that there's dead bodies and whatever.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just didn't really like them that much.
Well,
like
so
kind
basically...
of a waste of space.
I mean, this book follows Abraham Lincoln's life, and I knew some about Abraham Lincoln's life, but not enough to be, like, fact-checking this book.
Yeah. I actually listened to the audiobook towards the end, because I got it and it was easier for me to get through the audiobook, and there was a very short interview at the end of the audiobook with the author, and he said that he tried very hard to be as accurate as possible, and to cram as many facts about Lincoln's life into this book as he could. So I thought that was really interesting. So I anticipate that a lot of this is accurate. Obviously not the vampire hunting parts.
Yes.
But a lot of it is accurate. And I found out why he wrote this book, which was that he went into a Barnes & Noble, and it was at the point where vampires were really popular. Mm. And then for some reason, the top-selling biographies were about Abraham Lincoln. So you had Abraham Lincoln and vampires just at the front of every bookstore. And he was like, oh, how cool would it be to just like mix these into one thing? And then he didn't, and he wrote Pride and Prejudice Zombies.
Which I actually also, I didn't read that one, but I liked the movie of.
He wrote this later. After that was a success. So I thought that was interesting.
That is. Well, he doesn't do a lot to build the mythology of vampires necessarily, which is interesting. It's kind of one of those books that's just like they assume you know what a vampire is.
Yeah.
And they kind of just throw you into the world.
Yes. And I do like the lore of the vampires that he does come up with, because he does explain vampires to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Not initially, but just like as you go through the book, he does explain some things. And I was like, oh, I like the way the vampires are. Can I tell you exactly how the vampires are in this? No, maybe it'll come to me as we talk about it.
They can be in sunlight.
Yeah.
After they're a little bit older, it sounded like.
It's harder for them to be in sunlight otherwise, like when they're new, but they're not going to die.
Yeah, they just wear sunglasses.
Yeah, and even older ones will wear sunglasses too. They're essentially immortal.
Mm-hmm. They have super fast reflexes, which makes sense.
But the really old ones, I liked this.
This detail, yeah.
Because they eventually commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a regular thing for really old vampires. And I really appreciate that being brought up, because it's something that so many stories with humans turned immortal that they just don't address, but that, like, human beings are not really designed to live forever on Earth. And so it makes a lot of sense that they would really struggle with that.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it being brought up. I mean, obviously I don't want people to commit suicide, but it was an interesting way to like bring that in.
Yeah.
That immortality is not necessarily like the best thing for humanity. So
yeah. And other than that, most of the vampires are fairly similar to humans. I mean,
yeah.
They're not, they're not like separate species or whatever.
Yeah.
They're people who died and became vampires.
Yeah. So Abe encounters vampires, and then he decides to go hunt them.
Not like, super early, though, because he doesn't know at first that they're vampires.
Yeah.
Because what happens is his dad goes into debt, and apparently Abraham Lincoln never got along with his father.
Yeah, I guess not.
And tried to get away from him as soon as possible and all this stuff, and he was very close with his mother, but his mother died when he was pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
And this book makes it out to sound like a vampire poisoned her, essentially.
Yeah, because his dad was in debt to him.
To a vampire, yes.
So
then later, when he finds out that vampires are real, and he pieces it together eventually after the fact that it wasn't just a guy, and his mom didn't just get a sickness; she was intentionally killed. Like,
yeah. And then that's what his first vampire he kills.
Yeah, he finds that guy.
Yeah, and he kills that one for killing his mom.
Yep.
But he
barely survives it.
Yeah, he also finds out that his grandfather was killed by vampires.
Mm-hmm. And his dad watched it happen, because his dad gets drunk and tells him the story.
Yeah.
While he's still, like, a teenager or whatever. Which is I think, is that how he first finds out that they're real?
I don't remember. I think that was, like, the confirmation he needed.
I think it was. For him to go act and, like, kill the first vampire.
Yeah. Then he goes vampire hunting fairly regularly for a little while.
But the interesting thing about this book is it doesn't focus on a lot of the actual hunting.
Yeah, you don't actually spend that much time. Like, the moments that you do spend with it are really good, and I wish that there were a lot more of those moments. Mm-hmm. But there's not, because he has to put in Lincoln's, like, actual life and timeline into this, and I almost wish that he would have gone an alternate history route instead, where he could have done a lot more exploration. Because, to be honest, the farther you get into Abraham Lincoln's story, the more we, like, know and have accounts as to what he was doing when. And the author of this book really took advantage of not having those in-between parts when he was younger. So he was doing a lot more vampire hunting. But then as he gets older, the author has to make excuses for Abraham Lincoln to not be hunting vampires at certain points. Because he's like, no, we know that he was, like, on this campaign trail, or he was, like, living in this city or whatever. And it's really weird, and I don't know how accurate it is, whether Abraham Lincoln really suffered from debilitating depression, but he does in this book several times, and that's what stops him from vampire hunting a lot of the times.
Yeah, I don't know if he suffered from as severe as the book makes it out to be, but the quotes from him were real, and he sounds very depressed in the quotes. But he also suffered a lot of tragedy in his life.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
So
yeah, Abe Lincoln has a pretty tragic life, which I didn't know fully. I didn't know all the
because
details.
basically his dad remarries and he ends up befriending his new step siblings, which like helps him get over his first depressive episode, which is after his mom dies. And so, but he blames his dad for it essentially once he finds out what happened.
Yeah.
So, and then he falls in love.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the woman he falls in love with, her father. So basically, he finds out fairly early on that vampires are very close with slave owners. Yeah. Because they want to feed on slaves.
Yeah. Well, it's an easy, readily available.
Yes. Just taking advantage of a system that's already there type thing. Yeah. So it turns out that her dad is kind of in cahoots with them or whatever. And then it also turns out that she's already... Is she a fiance or she just was like...
She was betrothed at some point, but that's, I don't...
To the other guy, yeah. So okay. I think she was already somebody else's fiance, basically, and he fell in love with her anyway.
Yeah, she fell in love with him.
And it was a long-distance thing. Like, her fiance didn't live in town and whatever.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so basically she tells the guy, I'm breaking it off, I'm going to be with Abraham Lincoln. And then the guy... Is the guy a vampire?
I don't remember.
I can't remember if the guy is a vampire or if he, like, gets a vampire to come and kill her.
Yeah. So she dies.
Yeah.
And he's like, Abraham's like, I'll never love again. I was like, you will, though, because I know you have children.
I mean, he does love again, but according to the author, anyway, he never has the same, like, deep romantic love.
Yeah, because your second love isn't ever as the same as your first and all that, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? It's sappy.
Who cares? It's sappy. I thought it was very romantic.
But yeah, so Abraham Lincoln's killing some vampires. I actually really hated the parts where he had to, like, break from that. Because Abraham Lincoln really felt very strongly that it was his sworn and called duty to go and kill vampires, which is very noble of him. But then he, like, took all these breaks where he would just be like, wow, I'm kind of depressed, so I'm not gonna go kill vampires anymore. And I'm like, well, okay.
And part of his strategy for killing vampires is that early on his, like, second hunt, he meets a vampire who saves him, because he probably would have died hunting this other vampire who was stronger than the first one.
Yeah.
And then this vampire, Henry, is the one who later gives the journal to Seth.
Yes.
Being immortal and all that.
Yeah.
And Henry basically kind of explains to him some of vampires' weaknesses, how to, like, better hunt them, and then he, because Henry doesn't necessarily, like, hate other vampires, but he
has a moral problem with them.
Yes,
he doesn't think
he is one.
He thinks, well, I guess it's not a morality problem, it's an ethics problem. Because Henry only kills bad people, so it's okay.
Yes.
that he only kills bad people to feed off of them. So the vampires that kill good people or children or, like, just random people, Henry doesn't think those vampires deserve to live anymore. Yes. So he's like, Abe, you're really cool. Why don't you start hunting these vampires for me? Because Henry already does this in his spare time.
And Abraham already hates all vampires and basically wants them all dead. So he's like, sure, whatever. If you'll give them to me on a silver platter, I'll go kill them.
Yeah. So Henry, I mean, he sends him some assignments every once in a while. It's not, like, constant or anything. He just sends him a letter with a name and a location, and then Abe goes off and kills the vampire. I like that they addressed that Abe needed money to do this.
Yes. Yeah.
And he didn't always have the money to do it. But sometimes he did it anyway. Because he was like, well, the vampires really need to die, so...
Yeah. So he, in order to get away from his dad, he originally takes work on a steamboat. And that allows him to travel and, like, hunt while he's traveling.
Yes, but it doesn't allow him to make any money.
Not really.
Because he's not
he just
actually...
gets, like, a stipend.
Yeah.
And then he tries running a general store in a small town, and that goes completely terribly, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah, me too.
He is a good speaker, but not a good businessman. Yeah. And, and he meets a guy in that town. So originally everyone when he moves to town is like, oh, he's going to have trouble with this gang of guys who's like running the town. And then basically he ends up having to wrestle their leader, Jack.
Yeah.
In order to get him to calm down. And it works. And Jack's like, no, this guy has my respect.
Yep.
And then him and Abraham Lincoln become, like, best friends.
BFFs for life.
Yeah, like us.
And,
BFFs! Yeah. And then he actually ends up telling Jack about vampires, and they go vampire hunting together. And I really liked Jack's character, actually.
Yeah, he was good. None of the characters stay for long enough in Abraham Lincoln's life, though, in my opinion. I mean, this is spanning, like, his entire life, and it's really not that long of a book.
Yeah. And the hard part is, like, I always wanted more of Henry, because Henry was interesting.
Yes, I really liked Henry, and you just don't get that much of him, because Abe goes through phases of really hating Henry. Like, he gets really pissy with him, and so Henry's like, all right, well, I'll step back. What's, 20 years to me, an immortal being. And so then we just don't get to hear about Henry.
Yeah, because it's kind of understandable that, like, Abraham Lincoln wouldn't want to be told what to do by a vampire.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's interesting what Henry is doing, and Henry basically sees that America is being taken advantage of by vampires.
Yeah, they're the whole cause for the Civil War.
Yep.
So no worries, people are still innocent and just great, and really it's just vampires corrupted everyone.
Yeah, vampires manipulated slave owners.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And
it wasn't that people are terrible, it was that vampires showed up.
Yeah.
But there's good vampires too, who are like on the side of the Union. Yeah. And I don't know if I liked that. I don't know. I don't feel like it was explored enough.
No.
I feel like Henry and the other vampires to make it worth it.
Yeah.
To talk about the implications of banding together with quote unquote good vampires versus like the bad vampires. Like, I understand that as a concept, but I don't think it was.
I think they needed it to be like realistic that we could win a civil war
against vampires.
Yeah, against vampires. Yeah. We would have to have some vampires on our side.
Yeah.
But I agree. It was just like kind of one scene where the vampires like are like Henry proved that Abraham Lincoln is actually who you say he is and that he's going to do it.
Yeah.
And then
that was it. Then they're like, "Oh, we're all for you."
Yep.
And that was it. And you're like, "Oh, okay." That didn't take very much convincing at all.
No, the end just felt a little bit rushed, which is funny because it wasn't like a fast book.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't. I wouldn't say it dragged either.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like a page turner where you were like...
Yeah. Well, there was a lot more action in the first, like, third of the book because you're first following him where he's hunting vampires regularly and he's getting to know Henry and he's, like, doing these things and he's sort of, like, working his way up. But then once he, like, gets married, he kind of settles down and he has a couple kids and then he just doesn't have the time to go vampire hunting anymore. And so what the author did was something that really annoys me, which is he threw in dream sequences.
Yes.
Where Abraham Lincoln dreams, like, horrible things happening to his family or, like, just a hunt gone terribly wrong, but then he like wakes up and everything's fine. And I didn't mind the first one, but I think he did like 3.
Yeah, the first one was good because I was like, oh, and I really believed it. But once you've done that once and you've tipped your hand, like you really can't do it again to get the same effect.
Yeah, and it happens like 3 times.
Yeah.
And it's at points where you're like, I wish there was a little more action in this. So then he just like throws in a dream sequence and it's like, that's not really action though.
That's not what I wished for. I wanted real action.
Yeah. And I guess also like the suspension of disbelief by the end of it was a little bit off for me because by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, okay, but like how would he have really like killed this many people? And like a lot of the vampires that he kills are high profile. Like it is not as if he's just killing, like, a vampire off the street. You know, these are high-profile people who a lot of people know about and are watching and are really engulfed and in like, politics and their communities and stuff. And then Abraham Lincoln just comes through and murders them. And then nobody ever talks about it.
Yeah, no one ever catches on. Like, it's not until he's actually running for president that anyone tries to stop him from, like, the vampire side.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, it gets to be too much.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're like, I know that, like, it's not like they had DNA sequencing back then, but they did solve crimes. Like, they solved murders.
They could tell Abraham Lincoln was in these towns, and look, someone died each time he visited one of these towns.
Yeah, and it's just, it was too much. It was too much by the end of it. I didn't believe it anymore. In the beginning, I was like, okay, this is fine. Yeah. Like, he was going a lot of towns over. He was traveling, like, along high travel routes, you know?
And it was much subtler at the beginning, too.
Yeah.
Like, because he wasn't as experienced, so he was being more careful. In fact, there's an incident where he gets Jack, and then his new friend, when he starts becoming a lawyer, he starts with this guy who I meant to look up, but I think they called him Speedy.
I don't remember.
Anyway, they go on a hunt together and almost die because they get ambushed, and Jack loses an arm.
Yeah.
And ends up retiring from the vampire hunting and becomes Abraham Lincoln's bodyguard instead.
Yeah. Which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know.
That was the last big action scene, I feel like, though.
Yeah.
Until the ambush.
And it wasn't even Abraham Lincoln.
No.
Doing anything. It was his two friends.
It was
being
his two
stupid.
friends, being dumb. Because he basically gave them advice and was like, I need you to go kill this vampire for me.
Yeah, and he said, do it this way. And then they did everything exactly wrong. So, it's really on them. But they did survive, and they made it. But, I don't know, I just don't believe that you could kill that many people, even back then, and just not have a single word about it. It's not that, like, he didn't get caught. It's that nobody ever talked about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not mentioned in the book. Like, that there were, like, newspapers about it. There was no, like, nobody was discussing it.
The only time newspapers come up is when it's talking about the vampires getting worse in, like, Chicago and New York and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think there are too many vampires in the story.
And
that's always a problem, is that my suspension of disbelief starts dissipating when you have hundreds or thousands of vampires. And it's like, okay,
I think it was only hundreds, but
it was a lot, though.
But yeah, that's still a lot, because our population
they talked about,
smaller.
like, battles having, hundreds of vampires just in, like, this one army. Yeah. And, and then they'd go and be a different army, and there'd still be hundreds of vampires. And it's like, okay, well, I don't think you can have that many and have people be like, oh, yeah, just vampires, just, like, they just don't exist. It's like, for real? Like,
I mean, I guess there's the argument that people only believe what they want to believe.
Yeah, but there's a difference between saying people only want to believe what they want to believe when you're talking about, like, Sasquatch, who doesn't have... It's not like Sasquatch is across the country and there's 10,000 of them, and everyone sees one every once in a while. I mean, in this book, they talk about, like, incidences where people are like, oh, I saw people jumping off of buildings and doing all this stuff and ripping people apart, and it's like... Okay, well, clearly you have a lot of witnesses to these odd things happening. Those people are going to talk about it, and even if you just make them into a subset and you say, like, oh, there's these conspiracy theorists, that's fine, but it's just not even mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with this book and the premise is that that's not a conspiracy theory I've heard of anyway, that, like, vampires or werewolves are, like, real. Like, no one...
Yeah. Nobody talks about them like that.
No. Aliens, yes. People believe in aliens. People might even believe in, like, Sasquatch, but...
Cryptids.
Yeah, cryptids.
Yeah.
But no one really believes that humans turn into other things.
So. Yeah. Yeah. There's not... I mean, I'm sure that there's a few people out there. I'm sure that you can, like, go through and make an argument that there are people, but it's not a large enough percentage of people
for us to be like, oh, maybe this camp is right. And Seth Grahame figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, even, like, with Sasquatch or, like, Mothman or, like, whatever cryptid you have in your area, you can talk to people and they can really, like, talk you into thinking about this being a real thing. And then you walk away and you're like, like, you can go in and figure out more information and be like, you know what? It could go either way. Or you can just decide that it cannot go either way. Yeah. Like, this person is not all there. They're too entrenched in the conspiracies. Yeah. But the fact that this book just doesn't bring it up, though, it's not talked about in that way. It's just like, you either believe in vampires or you don't. And there are times when he's, like, Abraham Lincoln convinces someone to believe in vampires. And it's like, they don't talk about what he does.
No.
Or says
it's
to convince him.
specifically kept secret.
Yeah, he's just like, oh, and then I convinced him that vampires were real. And I was like, but how? How did you convince him?
Well, I mean, you could argue that, like, with Speedy, he didn't do the best job, because I think that hunt that him and Jack went on was one of, like, Speedy's first, and he way underestimated them. But,
yeah.
So he only half believed. He thought maybe Abraham was exaggerating.
Yeah, maybe.
But no. Also, I found it kind of funny that one of my favorite things about this book was that Abraham Lincoln met Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah. I really enjoyed it, though, and I was like, this is hilarious, and I kind of want to know if they did meet in person, but I never looked it up.
I did not look it up either. I didn't do any research for this.
They could have. They could have met. We rarely do research for this podcast.
I have never done research for this podcast. I've done research while we've been recording.
I've looked up quotes and stuff before, but I've never been like, oh, I read this article about Edgar Allan Poe and Abraham Lincoln to figure out their relationship.
Yeah. Nope.
But the argument was that Poe also knew about the existence of vampires. So
yeah, but
they bonded over that.
Yeah. I can't remember what I gave this book out of, like, my star rating.
I think I gave it a 3.5.
I think I gave it a 3.
Because I liked it pretty well. Yeah.
It reads pretty well.
And for historical fiction, that's kind of big for you.
Yes. Well, it's not historical.
Well, it's
kind of...
What is it? Historical fantasy?
Yeah, it would have to be that. Because it doesn't deviate. But like I said, I kind of wanted it to be more. I wanted him to take more liberties with Abraham Lincoln's life. Because, first of all, I don't know enough about Abraham Lincoln's life. I don't know.
Yeah.
I am confident in saying that I think that most of the events in this book probably took place in regards to Abraham Lincoln's, like, sans vampires. But I'm not confident enough to sit down and eke out which are which. Yeah. You know, which ones he might have taken liberties on and which ones he didn't. Also, at the very end, we freaking spend so much time with John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah.
That I wanted to tear my ears off because I was listening to it at the time. And I was like, how long are we going to sit here and
talk about the theater?
Yeah, because it was just really a long time.
And the thing with that is, like, it felt like he was trying to build suspense, but the issue is that we already know what happens because that's the most famous part of Abe Lincoln's life.
Yes.
So it's like, just gloss over it. Like,
yeah.
Not gloss over it, but, like, go to Mary Todd's perspective, you know? Like,
yeah.
Do something else.
That would have been way better. I don't know. Oh, and then Henry decided that some men are just too interesting to die.
Yeah.
Which implies that Abraham Lincoln is still alive and he's a vampire somewhere. Which is, I was really upset. I was really mad about this.
Yeah.
I said at the beginning it was going to be fiction. Mm-hmm. But no, I was really mad about that because Abraham Lincoln had a lot of tragedy in his life, and a few of the tragedies were that he lost children. And every time he lost a kid, every time a child died, Henry would come to him and be like, hey, I could make your child into a vampire and then they could be alive and you could see them. And every single time Abraham Lincoln said, no, we're not doing that because that's morally and ethically completely wrong. Like, I spent my entire life killing vampires and you come to me with this. And the last time he came to him, Abraham Lincoln was like, I never want to see you ever again, Henry. And I am standing by that. And so Henry...
And that's what happens.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Henry leaves, and he's like, okay, I'm never going to see you again. They still communicate. They communicated after that a few times.
Wrote letters.
But Henry never went and saw Abe again. And I was like, good, because I think that was the third kid that had passed.
No, I think only 2.
I can't remember.
I think they only had 3
and only
one lived.
No, I thought he had 4 kids and only 1 lived. Oh. Well, anyway, it was the second or the third kid that passed. I think it was the third. I don't know enough about Abraham Lincoln's life. So, and I was glad that Abraham Lincoln took that stand, but then, like, in the end, it kind of... Yeah, it really undercuts it.
Because that's
it's
rude
like,
of Henry to be like, oh, I'm going to bring you back.
Yeah, he does this to a man who wouldn't let Henry turn his own children into a vampire, and then Henry's like, but I'm going to turn you into a vampire.
But the thing is, I guess, Abe could, if he was turned into a vampire, then choose to die again, and it'd be permanent.
Yeah, but Nobody knows what happens to vampire souls. And that's the thing.
True.
Is that Abraham Lincoln is a Christian man.
Yeah.
And it's mentioned throughout the book. And I like how it was handled. But turning him into a vampire is just like, I don't know. That's like tenfold worse.
Yeah.
Because Abraham Lincoln doesn't believe that believes that vampires are damned.
They're an abomination, yeah.
And nobody really knows what happens to vampires after they die the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And so Henry has doomed Lincoln.
Yeah.
At this point. And I don't know, I felt like it was underhanded. I felt like Abraham and Henry were both really well-developed, mature humans who
wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, who made like good ethical and moral decisions for the most part. But then all of a sudden at the very end, Henry's like, oh, he's too interesting to die. And it's like, that is the most shallow, like, it's completely selfish on Henry's part.
Yeah.
And it just seems like very odd. And then it doesn't make sense with the framing device because now thinking back on it, I almost would have rather Abraham Lincoln showed up to Seth Grahame and given him the things because that would have made more sense.
But maybe he's trying to imply that that's what convinced, because that Seth doesn't tell you what convinced him that vampires are real, and maybe he met Abraham Lincoln.
Maybe he did, or I don't know, why then would Henry give the journals to Seth? Maybe Abraham Lincoln was finally like, I'm done being a vampire. And maybe that pushed Henry over the edge. See, and that's why I think there should be another framing device at the end. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it have been great to know?
We've come full circle.
We have! Look at that! It wasn't even that hard.
Nope.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know, I didn't hate reading this book. I just think that there's a lot of weird little issues that I have with it that push it from being
It's good for what it is, but it is based on a gimmick, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
That he's not trying to hide that fact or be like, oh, this is some highbrow, literary.
I mean, he even made it like super meta by having him be like the opening character.
But it could have still been developed a little bit more than it was. Yeah. Also, I remember what my icebreaker was going to be.
Let's do the icebreaker
Abraham.
I don't know. Do we have any more to say about this book?
Not really, do you?
No.
It's been too long. We can't remember all the details.
Yeah, and I think we kind of hit all the major points.
Well, you didn't... What did you say your star rating was? You said
3.
Yeah.
Because it was fine. It was solidly written, and it was interesting most of the way through. I just have a lot of little issues with it. Yeah, but some of them are issues that I have because I don't know if they're... I don't know the history, like the real life history.
Yeah, so if you were looking for like a fun horror, it's not that scary of a book, but there are some like suspenseful parts.
Well, the problem is that it's not that scary because we all know what happens to these characters.
You can't die, so...
Yeah. You even know what happened to Henry because he's introduced in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So...
But he does a good job of still making it feel like there are...
Yeah, and there's obviously, like, things that, like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know that Abraham's first love died. I didn't actually even know the name of his wife. So, I had no idea if she was going to make it or not. I didn't know
I knew that.
I didn't know when she passed away. I didn't know about his kids dying. You know, there was a lot of things that, like, if you're already, like, an Abraham Lincoln fanatic, like, you've read... even just one decent biography on him, you will, like, know most of the characters and most of the things that happen. But I still think it'd be kind of fun. It'd be interesting, because then you would know where all the breaks are, where he's inserting vampires, which I think would be fun to have known going into this book. Mm-hmm. Anyway, okay, so...
So the icebreaker that I had thought of was because Abraham Lincoln was a wrestler. Was whether or not you had a wrestling phase. I told you about this. I told you about this ahead of time.
You did. I forgot about it.
Because me and my cousins had quite a wrestling phase. More my cousins got us into it than, like, me seeking it out on my own. Mm-hmm. But, you know, to this day I have a fond nostalgia for WWE of a certain era. And, it's fun to watch. And now we're getting to the point where, like, wrestlers are coming out with biographies. The Rock has a show. Yeah. You know, and it's, like, it's very interesting because this has, like, come full circle into now it's, like, 10 years later. And I'm like, they all look so old. And I remember when they were... Yeah. You know?
They
when
were
the
old then
Undertaker-
too, but I was 10.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's my image of wrestling. Now, obviously, what Abraham Lincoln was doing was a completely different type of wrestling.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, you have like no history of wrestling.
No. My siblings and I fought, but that's about it. We didn't have wrestling on TV.
Yeah.
We didn't watch it. I'm pretty sure that's cable.
Yeah.
So we only had public broadcasting. Thank you very much. I was poor.
And none of your brothers wrestled or
No.
Not interested.
We were homeschooled through 8th grade.
Right.
And if you don't start sports before that, you don't really do much.
You don't get into it.
Yeah. No.
I mean, I've seen footage of like high school wrestling and I find that not interesting at all.
No.
So.
I don't think it's interesting either.
So I probably would have, even in Abraham Lincoln's time, maybe there was a lot less entertainment back then, so maybe I still would have watched, but...
The WWE of...
The WWE of the day.
Yeah.
What do they call them? The log splitter? Fence splitter?
I have no idea.
Yeah, they called it... That was something they called them. Well, anyway. Yeah, and I liked that they did tie in well, because he is often depicted with an axe.
Yes. And that was his vampire hunting tool of choice. I don't know. I didn't hate it. I did not have a wrestling phase, though. We did have a fighting a lot phase, though. Me and my siblings. And then we moved to a bigger house, and then we didn't fight quite as much.
So basically, your siblings and you are cats.
Yes. We had some space, and we were like, oh, I don't necessarily feel like murdering my sister anymore, because I can walk away from her.
It's a family full of cats.
Yes. Well, we did have cats growing up as well, so
yeah.
They were very relatable.
I think that the most interesting thing in the background of this book is that the U.S. of the time was not that different than the U.S. of now.
Oh. What do you mean by that?
As far as, like, political division, like, people talking about states' rights versus the rights of the nation.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all of these same debates are still happening now.
Yeah, it did not feel like I was stepping into something that was completely unfamiliar.
No, I wasn't like...
I'm not a history person. Like, I'm not a history buff at all. I don't really read much history, and, I don't know. I take it in bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't that hard to understand.
No, and it was...
where people were coming from.
I mean, because it's been not quite 200 years, but a long time. And I'm not saying we're on the brink of civil war now, because I don't think that's true.
No.
But it just was, like, interesting to be in that environment and be like, okay, yep.
These are precursors.
Yeah.
You can kind of see things and you're like, oh, that's sort of what's happening today. I think it's different, but I think it's comparable in some ways.
And even with transportation and stuff, like, it wasn't that far off from what we have now. I mean, things took longer, but, like, letters and stuff could get around pretty fast, and a lot of the travel was pretty quick.
We just have really fast, short letters.
Yes, which we call text messages.
It's a good time.
So, yeah, so that part of it was interesting, too. And part of that is probably because Seth Grahame-Smith is a modern author who's writing in that perspective. But
yeah. Good times. Sorry that I feel like we remembered most of it. I remembered more than I thought I would starting this.
It's always when you're, like, talking about it, you, like, stuff comes back to you.
Yeah.
But it has been a while since we finished the book. Yeah. So there might be some...
Well, we definitely couldn't remember everyone's names, so...
No. Speedy might or might not be called Speedy.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know how we could have forgotten Abraham Lincoln, but whatever.
We know we got Abraham Lincoln and Henry, and those are the important ones.
Yeah, they are. They were.
It was kind of a sad end, though. I mean, I just think Abraham Lincoln really was a pretty brilliant man. I mean, just from the quotes and, like, everything that you can read about him, it's like, he had a lot of thoughts.
Yes, he did.
And he was really willing to stand behind what he said, which was cool.
He's iconic.
Yeah. Who knows how it would have gone if he hadn't died in that theater.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there's somebody who's writing an alternate history fan fiction right now.
Oh, there's probably one out there.
There's probably more than one out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening. This one was really rambly, but we're just living up to the name.
Yes, Literary Ramblings. I forgot to say that at the beginning. Well, you know where you are.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know what we're reading next. It's
What?
my pick, and I haven't picked yet. Oops.
Wow, this is a great outro.
Well, this is gonna air in like January, maybe February.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Happy New Year.
Yes, I hope your 2023 is better than your 2022 was,
And definitely better than the 1800s.
All right, bye.
Bye.